Good day to everyone. Again, my name is Stephane St-Onge. I'm based in Nassau in the Bahamas, and I'm the Chief Compliance Officer of Westend Nassau. So let's talk about the Bahamas today. So the Bahamas is an independent country since 1973. It used to be until then a British colony. So it's always weird because when people are traveling to the Bahamas, especially from the United States, we drive on the left side of the road here. So it's still a British-inspired country, but it's fully independent since 1973. It's one of the oldest democracy in the Western Hemisphere. In fact, here there's a parliament for 280 years. And it's a country that is very similar to United Kingdom in terms of politics. Obviously, when you're thinking about the Bahamas, you think about the beaches, the ocean, the sun, everything. And it's true that the weather here is fantastic. Sometimes we have hurricanes, but normally only one big every 20, 25 years. So since we had a big one 2 years ago, we should be okay for the next 10, 15 years. Also, what is very interesting about the Bahamas is that it's one of the last true tax-free country. We're going to talk about it later during my presentation. So in the Bahamas, it's a country with a population of 400,000 people. 300,000 people live in the capital, Nassau, which is on the island of New Providence. New Providence Island is a very small island, but 3/4 of the entire population live there, and the capital is located here in Nassau. The other islands are less populated. I would say that there's maybe one other island where you have some kind of density in terms of population, which is a Freeport on Grand Bahama Island. But I could tell you, having visited not all of the 700 islands, but many of them, the nature here is spectacular. And for people who enjoy ocean, sea, it's a paradise. It's a real paradise. Okay, now let's start talking business. 10 reasons to invest in the Bahamas. Firstly, what is interesting about the Bahamas is that it's very close to America, United States, and also LATAM. So it's a country that is next to United States. In fact, it's less than 50 miles from Miami. When you take a flight to travel from Nassau to Miami, it's a 25 minutes flight. So we are very, very close to Miami. There's at least normally, not at the moment with the pandemic, but normally there's between a 6 and 10 daily flight between Miami and Nassau. So it's very easy to connect with Florida, southern Florida. The currency in the Bahamas is the Bahamian dollar, but it's fully pegged with the US dollar. And in fact, when you go to the grocery store or to restaurants, you may pay either in US dollars or Bahamian dollars. There's some kind of currency restrictions with regard to B dollars, but this apply only to citizens. So citizens of the Bahamas need to get approval from central bank to have a US dollars bank account, but this doesn't apply to permanent resident or people under a work permit. They are able to open a US bank account without any restriction in the Bahamas. Now, we are also on the same time zone as New York City and Toronto. So for people who like to do business on the eastern coast of USA, it's very convenient. And normally there's direct flight between all major US cities, including New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, Orlando, Toronto, Montreal, At the moment, obviously, there's less flight. I will say a few words about the status of the pandemic here. And also, normally there's a direct flight, a daily direct flight, London Nassau on British Airways. At the moment, it is suspended. BA is talking about maybe resuming their flight from London next spring, but normally there's a plenty of flight available from the Bahamas. As I mentioned, also it's a very peaceful country. It's very stable. It's democracy. It's very pro foreign investment. When you look at all the big resort hotels in the Bahamas, such as Bahamas, which is a $4.5 billion investment made by a Chinese company. When you look at all the other investment by foreigner, we may say easily that the Bahamas is a country very open to foreign investment. And the next election are due next year, May 2022. There's two major parties. It's a little bit like in the UK. There's two parties, and every 5 years they change power. So it's a very stable place. As I said, it's an independent country. The rule of law is fully applicable. And this is very important because when you compare to other places in the Caribbean, like the BVI, Cayman, and Bermuda, they are not fully independent. So sometimes this big decisions are taken in London, not here in the Caribbean, and that might create some issues. For example, as you know, right now, there's a trend to have a public registry for companies and trusts. And in the Bahamas right now, at least for companies and trusts, we are not going to have a fully open public registry, which is going to be different in the BVI, Cayman Island, and Bermuda, because they are not fully independent and they need to follow the rules in UK. So this is a major, I think, plus for the Bahamas to be a fully independent country. And however, as I just said, the rule of law is fully applicable. British laws normally apply here. And the Supreme Court of Last Appeal of the Bahamas is still the Privy Council in London. So that's quite interesting. Now, there's no local tax here in the Bahamas on whatever you may find. So no capital tax on capital gains, inheritance, estate, wealth, corporate, royalties, dividends, interest, name it. There's no taxes at all. The only thing that has been implemented 5 years ago, it's what they call here a GST, a VAT. It's 12%. It's on goods and services purchase. There's a very few exception for some basic food. There's exemptions, but so beside the VAT, a local resident does not pay any taxes. The way the government finance its, let's say, public spending and investment, it's with the VAT. There's also tourism and gambling taxes and custom duties. So basically, that's the source of income for the government. In the Bahamas, you have, obviously, English is the official language. The people here are highly trained. You have professional, and for example, all the big four accounting firms are based here in the Bahamas. You have a legal firm, so you have doctors, everything. So the workforce is very, very efficient here. In fact, essential public services is fully available. We have two big hospitals in the Bahamas. There's one that is public, the Princess Margaret Hospital, and there's another one that is private, Doctors Hospital. But they are both very good hospitals. Most of the doctors are from abroad, so they are from either Canada, UK, United States. and they're talking about maybe having a medical school to launch a medical school here in the Bahamas in the short time. We have also a university. This is also new. For a couple of years, there's now the University of the Bahamas. Uh, we have also a very modern airport in Nassau that has been built a few years ago by a Canadian company. So we have a brand new modern airport. The climate is great, obviously, as I just mentioned. And also, we're gonna talk about banks later, but I would say briefly that the retail and commercial banking system here in the Bahamas is mainly run by Canadian banks. So you have here on the island RBC, CIBC, Scotiabank. So when you're banking here, you're banking with Canadian banks in terms of retail and commercial bank, and there's a lot of financing available with those Canadian banks. Obviously, they are provided in US dollars, but I will say a few words about it later. Now, some COVID update. We have very good news in the Bahamas. 2020 has been a little bit complicated. We had lockdowns, curfew, but at the moment, thanks God, there's almost no more COVID cases. So in the hospitals, there's I think just a couple people suffering from the COVID, and there seems to be no more COVID. So life is almost back to normality. There, we still have a curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. But shops, restaurants, bar, beaches, golf resort, tennis club, everything is open. And obviously, people are wearing mask, face mask when they enter, you know, a shop, or when you go to the grocery store, you wear the mask, but that's it. Also, there's no restriction for visitor. The only thing that you are asked to do, it's before landing in the Bahamas, it's to provide a negative COVID test of less than 5 days. And upon your arrival, 5 days later, you have to pass another antigen test. And if it's negative, that's it. There's no quarantine at all that is imposed to people visiting the Bahamas. And the flights, well, as I said, now there's no flight from the UK, but there's flight from Canada and United States. There's less than used to be, but we have still daily flights from either Canada or United States. Permanent residency. So there's a few ways to become permanent resident of the Bahamas. For example, if you marry a Bahamian citizen, but this might be complicated. So normally, if someone wants to become a permanent resident, there's a one path. It's to make an investment, a real estate investment in the Bahamas of at least $750,000. That's what we're gonna talk about today. What is very important to mention is that when you become a permanent resident of the Bahamas, you enjoy all the rights of the Bahamian, except that you're not allowed to vote or run for public office. But beside this, it's exactly as a citizen of the Bahamas, you have all the rights. Normally, because people are thinking also about citizenship, the government is maybe considering right now eventually to implement a scheme like we have in other Caribbean countries for citizenship by investment program, but the population seems not to be ready for that here. So we'll see what happens in the future. But when you are a permanent resident of the Bahamas, you're allowed to apply for full citizenship 10 years after having been granted your permanent residency status. But at the moment, the Bahamas does not allow dual citizenship. So it means that you have to revoke your previous citizenship if you want to become a permanent citizen of the Bahamas, which is a big hurdle. When you become a permanent resident of the Bahamas, obviously, as I just said, you enjoy all the rights of being a Bahamian, and including its tax-free status. As we know, at the moment, governments in North America and across Europe and the rest of the world are concerned about the health of their population. So we're fighting the pandemic for health purposes at the moment. But when life will be back to normal, there's going to be public financial issues, and we are afraid that taxes will go up. Government might also implement new taxes such as wealth tax and inheritance tax, or increase those taxes where it does already exist. So obviously becoming a permanent resident of the Bahamas might be a great advantage for tax purposes. What is important to mention is that when you are a permanent resident of the Bahamas, there's no requirement to stay here in the Bahamas for a minimum time requirement in a given year. So you may be a permanent resident of the Bahamas and you don't lose that status, even though you're physically not here even for a single day in a calendar year. This is very interesting and very flexible. Yes, I spoke about the retail and commercial bank in the Bahamas that are mainly run by Canadian bank, but we have also a lot of private bank because, frankly speaking, the Bahamas used to be a big international financial center. Is not as big as it used to be. Because bank secrecy is something from the past, but we still have a very good and strong international financial center. A lot of private bank, broker dealer, trust company are located in the Bahamas. For just to say a few of them, we still have Credit Suisse, Pictet, Lombard, CBH, the Canadian banks that are here. So for someone who is moving here for tax purposes or for whatever reason, there's still a good financial center in the Bahamas. And on December 18, 2020, the FATF removed the Bahamas from the list of jurisdiction under increased monitoring. So meaning that we do agree now that the Bahamas International Financial Center is online with all the new regulation regarding banking and all these stuff. Yes, as I said, the Bahamas is a government that really is eager to attract foreign investors in the country, and for a real estate investment of at least $750,000, you may apply for permanent residency. Next slide. So the way to apply for permanent residency is very straightforward. Firstly, obviously, when you do your investment, you need to sign an agreement, a purchase agreement or a sales agreement. The minute you execute the purchase agreement, you need to file an application with the Immigration Department for a certificate of permanent residency. Together with this application, with filing the form to become a permanent resident, you have to provide documentation in support of your application. Obviously, this is normally done by your legal local attorney, your local lawyer. He will or she will assist you to proceed accordingly. Again, the process is very straightforward and it's not very complicated. And the government of the Bahamas right now really want to also speed up the process, because there has been complaint in the past that the process sometimes was too long, but now there's a willingness from the government to speed up the process. In fact, now they're talking about being able to give an answer or a reply within 4 weeks following the filing of the application. That's the list of documents that has to be provided when you apply for permanent residency in the Bahamas. It seems lengthy, but until 2 years ago, there was much more documents to provide. But now they have they cut the list of the documents to be provided, so we have less than we used to have before. So briefly, if we go through the list, there's a 200 processing fee that is not refundable that you have to pay. The letter of request, it's a very simple letter that your local attorney will draft. The application form, which is just 4 or 5 pages, it's very simple. You need to provide a medical certificate less than 30 days. So it's very simple, just as to mention that the applicant is in good physical and mental health, and that's it. Very, very simple. It has to be drafted in English, however. We have also to file a police certificate of less than 6 months. And this is something that you have to provide for the past 5 years. And if you have resided in more than one jurisdiction during that past 5 years, you may have to file more than one police certificate. 2 passport photograph. It's very important, 2 inches by 2 inches. They are very strict about this. Also, you have to a photocopy of your passport. Also, if you apply, if it's a family application, you have to provide those information for your spouse. You have also to do it for your children if they are under 20 years old. You have to also file your birth certificate, 2-character reference letter, again in English, the original birth certificate of the applicant's spouse, of the applicant's children. If you file the application also for your spouse, your marriage certificate, death certificate, or divorce decree if you are single, and if your child has been adopted, a documentary evidencing the adoption process. So it seems to be a lot of documents, but frankly speaking, that's not so much. Now, what is very important, as I said, the official English, the only official English in the Bahamas is English. So the documents that are not draft or written in English has to be translated. So normally that has to be done by either a lawyer or an official translator. And the copy of the documents, for example, birth certificate, have to be either legalized or apostille, depending on the country from where you're coming from. So if there's no apostille process in your country, it has to be legalized by, for example, a public notary. So as I just mentioned, when you apply for permanent residency, you could do it for yourself, your spouse, and your children under age 21. The main applicant normally apply also together with his permanent residency status to have the right to work in his own business. Unfortunately, at this stage, government does not provide the same right to the spouse and children, but they may apply eventually for a work permit if they want to work in the Bahamas. But for the main applicant, normally it's always coming with the right to work in an own business. When the permanent residency status is approved by the immigration department, you have to pay a $15,000 fee for the family. One certificate of permanent residency is issued for the entire family. So it's always funny because when you receive your certificate, you have all the pictures, the photograph of the family on this single certificate. So it could be funny to look at. And eventually, then you may apply for the card, the plastic residency card. Those cards are valid for 10 years and renewable. So there's one permanent certificate for the family, and then they issue a card for each member of the family. Sometime, and not sometime, but most of the time, people who wants to become permanent residency through the real estate Bahamas scheme make their investment through a company or a trust. So that's fine. There's no issue with that. And sometimes it's maybe better to do it that way for estate planning purposes or whatever else. The only thing is that if you proceed for your investment, real estate investment in the Bahamas with a company or a trust, you have to evidence that the main applicant is the ultimate beneficial owner of the structure, the legal vehicle that buy the real estate property. There's no minimum land of stay in the Bahamas for permanent resident, as I said. Also, there's no minimum length of time for permanent resident to own the property. But so, for example, in Portugal, for the Golden Visa program, you have to stay owner of your real estate property unless you lose your status of permanent resident. In the Bahamas, it's not the case. Legally speaking, the next day you have been granted permanent residency status in the Bahamas, you may sell your property and you are going to keep for life your permanent residency status in the Bahamas. When you become a permanent resident of the Bahamas, you may apply for a local driver's license, a national insurance board card, which is the equivalent of the social security number in the Bahamas. You may also go to a bank here and open a bank account as a local. So that could be very interesting, especially for CRS purposes. And starting in 2021, the Immigration Department will issue what they call tax residency cards for permanent residents that are physically present in the Bahamas for at least 90 days and less than 6 months in another country. The reason for that is that when, for example, you open a bank account elsewhere, you have to file forms, namely for FATCA or CRS purposes, and they are asking for a TIN number. There's no TIN number in the Bahamas because there's no taxes. So now the government decided that they will make available for people who wants it a tax residency card with a TIN number, but then you're gonna have to show that you have stayed for at least 90 days in the Bahamas. But frankly speaking, I'm not sure that people will be willing to get those cards, but who knows, that's something new that will happen this year. Beside the minimum $750,000 real estate investment, in the Bahamas, there are stamp duties, or now they call it VAT. There's a 10% VAT when you purchase real estate. Normally, the custom is that 5% is paid by the purchaser, 5% by the vendor. Realtors' commission are paid by vendors. Normally, the legal fee for the purchasers are 2%. Obviously, if you're buying a property, a multi-million dollars property, it could be less in terms of percentage. But let's say for the $1 million condo unit, expect to pay 2% of legal fees, and also expect on a yearly basis to have to pay a real property tax of roughly 1% of the value of your property. Now, for the permanent residency application itself, as I said, $200 when you find the application. When you I've granted the permanent residency status. To get the certificate, it's $15,000. Expect to pay between 7,500 and 10,000 of legal fees for your local attorney. The permanent residency card, now it's new from this year, costs $300 per card. And if you want to, for example, as it's the case and most of the time, buy your real estate property with a local IBC, normally the IBC will cost you $2,500. So final slide. It was my pleasure to give you some information today about the permanent residency status in the Bahamas. The Bahamas, it's a very lovely country. People are very kind. Myself, I'm doing business in the Bahamas for the last 25 years. I'm Canadian, by the way, but living full-time in the Bahamas for more than 5 years now, and I really enjoy it. And if you have any question or you need more info, do not hesitate to call me, send me emails, whatever. And we have also a good, interesting website to visit, westendnassau.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Very interesting to hear and learn about Bahamas. And we have some questions from our attendees. There is a question about vaccination program, which sounds quite interesting. I understand that Bahamas doesn't have a vaccination program in place or access to the COVID vaccines on the island. Is this correct? I have some investors who are keen to retire there, but obviously not having the possibility to get the vaccine privately. They're happy to pay. Is a huge barrier to entry right now for elderly retirees. Can you confirm if the vaccine is currently available on the island in the private hospital?
Okay. Okay. At the moment, contrary to Canada, United States, UK, France, whatever, they have not started to give the vaccine to the population. The government has set up a task force to roll out a plan to starting vaccinating the population. We are expecting that they will make public their plan next week. But the government already bought a vaccine. I think it's the Moderna vaccine. They make this purchase through the World Health Organization in Geneva. So they are dealing small. What I understand is that small countries are buying the vaccine through the WHO in Geneva. They already paid. They made a down payment to have access to the Moderna vaccine. And what we have as public information at the moment is that they are going to start giving the vaccine next March. So in, let's say, 6 to 8 weeks from now. Is it going to be available privately? I have personally no information about this, but it might happen because as I mentioned, there's, for example, 2 big hospitals in Nassau. One is public. It's a very good hospital. In fact, they are related to Miami hospitals. So it's very good, but there's also a private one, Doctors Hospital, and it's a great hospital. And I think that they will provide it. Not at the beginning, but for sure down the road privately.
Okay, next I will only take 2 questions to you, but please check the chat that maybe it will be more answers. Can land purchase be qualified as an investment?
No, not land. You need to, okay. What is important is to make an investment. So you may buy a project that is not built yet, okay? So the moment you sign your purchase agreement, you may apply for permanent residency. You don't have to wait until convenience, okay? But it has to be something built or to be built. Raw land does not qualify itself. And also you may buy 2 units, for example, because sometimes people say, okay, I would like to buy 2 small units. So if the total amount is in exceed of 750,000, then you may qualify.
And the final question, just to clarify once again, are there any restrictions by the nationality or the initial country of residence of the investor? Are there any restrictions for people coming from Africa?
No, no restriction at all.
Okay, perfect. Stefan, thank you very much. And
it's my pleasure.
Guys, notice the information, and if you still have any questions, I'm sure that Stefan will be very happy to answer and greet you in the Bahamas.
Of course. Thank you.